Now, please welcome to the stage author Andrea Swensson and Jimmy Jam.
Hello. Please give it up for our opening act, Cornbread Harris.
Tough act to follow.
Well, for those I haven't met yet, I'm Andrea Swensson. I'm here from Minneapolis. I'm an author and music journalist and podcaster. And for the last 3.5 years, I've been on an amazing journey of learning about Cornbread Harris and becoming a documenter of his life story and biographer. And I've also gotten to know his son, this man right here, the Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, multiple Grammy Award-winning, chart-topping Jimmy Jam.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks for being here. So I do want to give a shout out real quick to Caveat, because I think it was about 8 days ago that I contacted Ben Lilly, my friend who runs this place, and I said, hey, Jimmy and I are going to be in New York. What if we did an event? And he said, yeah. They just happened to have a cancellation. So thank you for coming out to a last-minute event. Thanks for being here with us. We're both really excited to be together and to be spreading the gospel of the story of cornbread, which has also evolved into the story of Cornbread and Jam, which we're going to tell you about tonight.
Yeah.
So I wanted to give a little bit of a backstory. This is a cover of my book, Deeper Blues, The Life Songs and Salvation of Cornbread Harris. It was just released in August. I started working on it a few years ago, but I actually met Cornbread and Jimmy just within a few months of each other back in 2017. Cornbread came into the studio at the radio station where I worked, Minnesota Public Radio, and he came in to be theoretically interviewed, but ended up really leading this session in our studio and really just made a strong impression on me as the host of that session, as someone who was a natural-born entertainer, someone who had been, spending decades and decades of his life in bars and dining halls and venues, just connecting with people through his music and through his storytelling, and I was utterly charmed. At that point, he was only 90 years old. That's the only picture I have that has both of us in it from that day, but he was just on fire. At one point, he looked over and said, I am in rare form today, and we said, yes, you are, Cornbread. And we just had a really delightful hour-long interview. So I think it was only maybe 2 months after that that it was announced that Jam and Lewis were going to be coming home to Minneapolis to host a series of events around the Super Bowl that was going to be held in town in that winter. And you and Terry Lewis came to town and did a press conference, and that was the first time that I ever got to meet you in person.
Right.
Which was really exciting. I'd given you a copy of my book that I had just released, Got to Be Something Here, The Rise of the Minneapolis Sound, and we started just communicating with each other.
Right.
So then a few years went by, and a pandemic happened, and Minneapolis, went through a really tumultuous period with the murder of George Floyd and unrest, and I ended up leaving my job and kind of wondering what was going to happen next. And I think it was only a few weeks after I left my job that Jimmy reached out with a text message, and he and I had been communicating a little bit, and he said, Minneapolis has been on my mind because I'm actually coming there to film this thing for the Billboard Music Awards at Paisley Park with Sounds of Blackness. And while I was there, I was thinking about maybe trying to see my dad. Would you know how to get in touch with him? And that was just a jaw-dropping text for me to receive. I didn't know the full extent of the Cornbread and Jam story up to that point. I knew that there was distance between you, but I certainly had no idea how much. And then the next text message came a few days later after I'd helped to coordinate a meeting. And it was this picture of Jimmy and Cornbread and Jimmy's son, Max, along with a message that said, hey, I just wanted to say thanks for hooking up that meeting. We just paid Cornbread a visit, and it was the first time we'd spoken in 35 years, which caused me to burst into tears. And I just put down my phone and thought, what a moment and what a story and what a remarkable turn of events. So before I go any further, Jimmy, I'd love to bring you into the conversation of, what was going through your mind at that point? Because I know there were some things brewing with you, even starting as early as the Super Bowl, about wanting to reach out to your dad. But tell me about that moment when it actually happened.
Yeah, when we were back for the Super Bowl, I thought we were going to be in the Twin Cities for probably, 10 days, a week or 10 days, whatever, however long it was. And what it was for me was I had, Terry, my partner, he has an interesting saying where he always says, you can't really criticize the boss if you haven't been a boss. And he said that about, in response to Prince, because, when Prince fired us back in the day, there was a lot of kind of like, well, why would he do that and all that kind of stuff. And Terry kind of always thought, yeah, but we've never been in a position that Prince was in, so we can't really criticize that decision that he made. I felt after raising my kids, I felt the same way about Cornbread. I felt like I couldn't criticize him as a father because I hadn't been a father myself. But now that my kids were grown, I just felt like I needed to say to him that there was I don't have any hard feelings, I don't have any bitterness, I don't have anything like that towards you, because I didn't want him carrying the weight of guilt or anything for, leaving, which he did. And so when I went up for the Super Bowl, I thought I was going to have some time to do that or to try to see him, and it didn't work out. We were just so busy each of the days. So it wasn't until a few years later, as you said, when the Billboard Awards was happening, they asked us to come up to Paisley Park and do something with Sounds of Blackness. And I just realized, well, I'm going to be in town a couple of days. My son Max came with me. He's kind of the adventurer of my three kids. He's the one that always likes to come and do stuff. And I just kind of thought, let me give it another chance. And the other person that was involved in this that was kind of interesting is Prince had a group called The Family, if you remember that group. And the leader of that group, St. Paul Peterson, actually had done a recording session with my dad and had actually DM'd me on Instagram and just said, hey, I'm with your dad doing a session. And I just kind of said, oh, how's it going? And he said, oh, he's doing great. His song sounds great and all that thing. The interesting thing about St. Paul is the person that replaced me in the time after Prince fired us. So you want to talk about full circles. There's a bunch of loops here, right? Mm-hmm. So when we came up, I got in touch with Cornbread's manager. What was his name?
Chris Mosina.
Chris. Mm-hmm. So Chris said, I can set it up so you can see him. I was flying out on Monday anyway. And he said, you don't have to go to his house or anything. I can set you up in like a place where he goes, and kind of a daycare type place where he goes, sees all of his friends a couple times a week. And he said, the good news is if it's not going well, you got a flight to catch. And if it is going well, you can spend a couple hours with him and nobody will bother you and that. And the latter is what happened. I ended up going on the Monday around noon. And what was so cool about it in that moment was, first of all, I got a chance to tell him that I had no, ill feelings or anything like that. But then he started talking to Max, his grandson, who he had never met. And all the things he was saying to him were all the things I said to Max. And then I said, you see where I get it from, Max? Now you know. And one of the things that was really funny was, whenever we go places, we always shut the place down. We're always the last ones to leave. And I remember my kids when they were younger, they'd go, Dad, do we have to sign every autograph? Do we have to take a picture with everybody and that kind of thing? And I'd always say, yeah, because you don't know where people have come from to come see you. That might be their only chance to come to see you, and you need to acknowledge people and do that. And that came totally from Cornbread. That totally came from my dad, because as a little kid, I was the one pulling on him going, do we have to stay and sign every autograph and take every picture and, that kind of thing. So he got a chance to see Max got to see the person I am through Cornbread and why I was the way that I was. So it was a magic, maybe 90 minutes of time. Mm-hmm. And, but it was the thing that kind of set everything in motion to how we're here today.
Right. Which, yeah, it was just the beginning.
Yeah.
Can we talk about how happy Cornbread looks in this picture, too? Just glowing.
Yeah.
That
was awesome.
Yeah, just to fill in a little bit of the story. So what happened next was within days of you sending me this picture,
Yep.
I set up a time to go visit Cornbread. And the funny thing is, I don't think I ever even thought about like why or what I was doing or how it was going to work out. I just went and sat down across from him and said, Cornbread, I'm going to write a book about you. And he looked at me like, who are you?
Right.
Okay. And he, at this point is 97 and has gone through many, many ups and downs in his career and has been promised things that didn't pan out and had offers made to him that got pulled away. And so he had every right to be extremely skeptical of some random lady coming and sitting down
Right.
across from him. But what we started to do was I said, well, how about I'll just come back next week with a recorder and we'll see how much you want to tell me. And if it goes well, we'll set up another time to meet. So I came back the next week and he was so ready. He told me his whole life story in an hour as my recorder was running and I was furiously scribbling down notes. And it started me on this journey of, okay, every time he gives me a piece of information as it's coming to the surface of his mind, I'm going to go see what I can find. And it turned into a weekly date, and it started recurring, and we started digging into this whole backstory of his life that I could tell he hadn't spoken about in a really long time. So it became really special. One of the first things that he mentioned was that he knew his mother's name, but he didn't know very much about her because she died when he was 3 years old, along with his father, the original James Harris.
Right.
We should mention Cornbread's father was named James Harris. Cornbread is James Samuel Harris Jr., and Jimmy is James Samuel Harris III.
Right.
So he knew his parents' names. He knew that they passed away under tragic circumstances when he was very young, and that he went through the foster system after that. But beyond that, he didn't really know anything about them. So I said, okay, I'm going to see what I can find. I went to the Minnesota Historical Society and started pulling up newspaper archives, and lo and behold, found this clipping about his mother becoming the organist at a local church when she was only 19 years old. And this was just an incredible thing to bring to Cornbread on one of our random Tuesday afternoons. Because I had to kind of jog his memory of, you told me your mother's name, and I said I was going to go look, and I found this clipping, and I handed him the piece of paper, and he said, so my mother was a musician? I knew it was in there somewhere, and he said, that's why it's in my heart and soul, that she was a musician too. And then we were both looking at this thinking, that is a picture of her, and we can't quite make out what it looks like, but I knew that there was going to be like an original version of this somewhere, or at least the actual microfilm that I could go look at. So I went to the Historical Society, and I told this librarian what I was working on, and I started crying as I'm explaining it. I'm like, he's never seen a picture of his mom, and he's in his 90s, and she's in this paper, and she was like, okay, we're going to figure this out. So we sat down at the microfilm like detectives,
Right.
and we started bringing the image into focus. And the first thing I said was, that looks like Jimmy Jam. Like, it's uncanny.
Right.
So that was the first of many moments that I shared with Cornbread, was, literally bringing him a picture of his mother, which was so moving for both of us to be able to experience. But it continued unfolding from there. I found school photos. Some of the only pictures of his childhood were in the archives of the schools where he went. After he passed through the foster care system, he landed back in St. Paul, Minnesota with his grandparents. He and his sister were the only black students at this white Catholic school. So that was an incredible find. I went to the Historical Society again and found a picture of him in a yearbook holding a tuba, which he had no recollection of ever playing.
Right.
And the funny thing about the way the mind works is I showed him this picture, and then the next week when I went to visit him, he sat down at his piano and he started working the low end like he does with that kind of boogie-woogie, beat. And he said, you know what? I think this whole way I play piano all goes back to that tuba.
Yeah, that's right. That's
So
right.
just amazing little moments. And then, of course, just to fill in a little bit more of his backstory, a huge historical moment in Cornbread's career was that he was part of the first rock and roll recording to take place in the state of Minnesota. He was a member of the Augie Garcia band. He's at the piano here. Augie Garcia is the guitar player standing on his piano, dancing around. There's also a saxophone player named Willie Brown. together they recorded a record called Hi Ho Silver, and on the B-side is actually Cornbread singing a cover of Going to Chicago. And it came out in 1955, and it was the first real recording of that style of music in the whole state. So really a historic moment in music, and a turning of, into this new genre of music in the 50s. And it's incredible to, trace that all back to this one person as well. But what really got interesting is when we were able to bring Jimmy into the conversations. And I was a little nervous to reach out to you at first, because we kind of got carried away, Cornbread and I was a couple months into doing all this research and learning about his early life, and I realized I never told you that I was doing any of this.
Right.
So I sent you a text and I said, hey, I'm writing a book about your dad, random thing. Would you be open to participating? And right away you said yes. And I would love to know, for you, what that was like to have this opportunity to not just see your dad the one time, but to continue exploring and maybe getting to know more about him.
It was, I'm a big believer in God's plan. I think particularly as I get older, I just don't fight things. I just think that everything happens for a reason. I think we were brought together for a reason. I think that I just felt like when you said writing a book on my dad, I thought, one is I would love to help, if I can help with some of the memories and kind of what that was. But also I felt like his story really needed to be told, particularly because of, as you mentioned earlier, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the fact that he played on the first rock and roll record made in Minnesota. Like, that wasn't lost on me. And he had a whole story. I mean, people know my story somewhat, but they didn't know anything about his story. And by the way, I didn't either, because we separated when I was probably 14, 15 years old. And a lot of questions I didn't ask him. I didn't know about his mom. I didn't know about his dad. I didn't know all of those things. So for me, I felt like, one, I have to say, I loved your writing because I loved your books that you had done before, that I loved reading them, and I loved the amount of not only research that you did, but just the heart in the books, the way you wove the stories. And so I just thought that if you were the one that was going to do the book on my dad, that it would be amazing, and I wanted to be a part of helping to bring that to life. So I was honored to be asked.
I swear I didn't set this whole thing up to fish for that compliment. Thank you, Jimmy. That's really amazing to hear. So what started happening is you and I connected over Zoom.
Yep.
And did an interview, and we got a lot of memories down on paper, and I started doing some research around what you remembered. And then I came to LA and visited you in person, and we spent probably 6 hours at your studio talking more, and I showed you a lot of the things that I was working on. And then in my very Minnesotan way, I waited until the 6 hour, 2 minute mark as I was getting in my car. And in your Minnesota way, you walked me to my car, and we had a long Minnesota goodbye. And I said, would you ever think about getting on a Zoom with your dad? And you were like, sure. And I was like, phew, okay, good. So they're going to talk again. So we set up a call, and I don't think any of us really knew what was going to happen on that call.
Right.
But what happened is that immediately, as soon as Jimmy's face appeared on the screen, Cornbread said, "This is my song, Deeper Blues." And he turned around on his piano and he said, "Pay attention."
Yep. And started playing.
Started playing for you. And it was so moving to know that, for all the great things that happened when you guys spoke to each other verbally, he had something that he wanted to say to you musically. And by, I think, the third or fourth Zoom call, you guys were starting to play together.
Right.
Which was amazing. I mean, what was that like on your end? Because I know I was sitting next to Cornbread as he's, at this point 95, and he's like, I get what Zoom is. Okay, so we're going to do a call and response thing, and I'll play and you play. And he just figured out how to play with Jimmy, over the internet. But what was that like for you?
It was amazing because, he was the foundation of, I never took music. I never was necessarily a music student. But everything that I learned about music really started with his teachings. And so a lot of the things that he was playing were things that back when I well, I was a drummer back in that day, but when I used to play with my dad, I was a drummer in his band. And so, first of all, hearing those songs was reminding me of, playing. But also, I realized the style in which he plays is so much the way I play. And a lot of the lessons he taught me about chord structure and, minor chords and major chords and seventh chords and major seventh chords and all of those things, I taught those same things to Max. I literally did the same exact thing. So it was just a lot of fun. And I just loved how he came to life. Like the music just made him alive. Or as he likes to say, euphoric is his word. And I totally felt that. And so even over, the internet and all that and over Zoom, it was still just fun to have, besides having a verbal conversation, to just have a musical conversation, just to play licks back and forth was awesome.
Yeah. And I really felt like there was a communication happening there.
Absolutely.
And it felt, not to be super cheesy, but it felt like there was something healing happening between the two of you in that way.
Yeah, that was the conversation. It was interesting. I did an interview earlier today, and somebody asked me about, have you guys talked about, when he left and whatever? And I said, no, we don't even need to have that conversation, because to me, that's the past, and we can't do anything about that. But what we can do is the now, which is important, which he talks about, and the future. So that to me is really the thing. But I think the conversations, it doesn't need to be talked about because it's the musical conversations that we've been able to have, and also the interpretation maybe of even our conversations through your eyes and what's written in the book a lot of times. I think that says it all. And I just think it was, I feel the same way he did. I felt euphoric. Just seeing how the music brought him alive, how much he enjoyed. And at any point in a conversation, it's so cool because his setup, the way Andrea has him set up, if we're talking on the Zoom, and if an idea pops into his head or a song he wants to play, his piano's right behind him. He just wheels around and starts playing. And it's just the coolest thing, just to watch him do that, just to watch how alive that makes him feel. So cool.
Yeah, it is. It's amazing to watch him perform for you.
Yeah,
because
I love
it's
that.
different than how he plays when it's just me. It's
Right.
like he's like, I'm gonna show him.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah, he definitely tries to outlick me for sure, and he does. It's all good. He's been doing it a lot longer than me. I'll catch up one of these days.
Well, I want to go back to your childhood and when you two were together. We have this picture that you actually shared on Instagram a
Yes.
few years ago on Father's Day to
Yep.
say thank you to your dad.
Yep.
And a few years after this was your first time visiting a recording studio with your dad.
Yeah.
And this was such an incredible story because you told it to me first, and then we actually found the physical evidence of it happening.
Yeah. So my dad was actually working, and I would go, once again, my musical life with him was so cool because he would play every weekend. He would have like a gig in a club or something, and I'd always go and watch. But then he was making this record with this artist named James Bonner, and he was just going to be the keyboard player on the record. So I remember going to the recording session, and I know I must have drove everybody crazy because the first thing I did was jump on the drums and start, banging around. Then he had an organ, and then I started, pulling the drawbars on the organ, and I was just that curious kid. But I got to watch him actually record the song, and that experience was so cool. And then what was even cooler is that as I remembered in my mind, Andrea found the actual pictures. I didn't know pictures even existed of this happening in the studio. And I totally remember that. I mean, that was so much a part of my, growing up to love music so much.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was amazing.
The cool thing to me about the way memory works is that when you told me this story, you still remembered the song.
Oh, yeah, Don't Rush It.
So we
Absolutely.
actually have a little bit of the song I want to share with you.
Okay, yeah.
Bring it back. And this is actually a record, so you'll hear the crackle.
As we should.
Don't give your 'cause once you give it and you find you've been had, it's too late to fight it, and it's really, really bad. And don't rush it, no, no. Take a little time and be sure that you're sure, and don't rush it, no, no. Take a little time and be sure that you're sure. My friends tried to tell
So I remember you humming that to me
Yeah.
while we were talking.
Right. Don't rush it. Yeah. Yeah. Take a little time and be sure that you're sure of it. I love that lyric. That's a great lyric.
That must have made quite an impression on you as an 11-year-old at that point, seeing
Yeah.
how a recording studio works for the first time.
Man, it was so cool. I just, it was, like all of those things were just all kind of seeds being planted. And, in my music education, like I said, I never went to formal music school, but my life was literally music school as I was growing up because of both my dad, the fact that he played music all the time, so I got that side of it. And then my mom, who wasn't musical as a profession, but in her music appreciation. Like she was the one that basically controlled the record player. And so everything that I heard growing up from particularly Ray Charles and people like that, I was hearing all the best music on one hand, and then I was going and watching my dad play on the other hand. So I was just totally immersed in music.
Another picture that we found that has an interesting tie to your early career is this publicity photo of one of Cornbread's bands, Huckleberry Finn, Cornbread and Friend. You mentioned that there was always a rotating drummer.
Yes.
So you were actually the friend at one point.
Yes, I was. So the guitar player that you see in the picture is named Coffee, and Coffee was great. Coffee had the baddest Fleetwood Cadillac that I'd ever seen in my life. It was power everything. It was beautiful. Matter of fact, I remember what it was called. I mean, there was, back in the day, people are too young to remember, but there was a Cadillac, it was called a Fleetwood Brougham, right? He had one above that called the Fleetwood Talisman. And it was power everything and whatever. And I remember on my dad's gigs, whenever they'd take a break, I'd just go and sit in the car and work all the buttons and stuff. And it used to drive him crazy, I'm sure. But what would happen is the drummer would show up late. And after that happened a bunch of times, Coffee was the one that said to my dad, why don't you just let your son play? He knows all the parts, all the songs. And my dad was kind of like, yeah, okay, well, okay, because the drummer was going to be set. He played 4 sets a night, so he was going to be late for the first set. So I went in and played the first set with him. And it went well, and the crowd enjoyed it, and it was good. The next week, the drummer didn't show up at all, and I ended up playing the whole night. And so when that was done, then my mom actually said, or Coffee said, you should just have your son just be in the group. And he said, okay, cool. So then my mom said, what are you going to pay him? And he said, no, I'll throw him out, a couple bucks, $20 or something, whatever. And she said, no. You're going to pay him just like you pay a real drummer. And that started my savings account. And my mom was my agent. And that was what I did. And I literally gigged with him for, I don't even know how long it was. It wasn't like a long period of time, because I met Terry Lewis after that, who turned me into a keyboard player, and that was the end of my drumming days. But yeah, it was great. I loved doing it and loved the songs. And one of the songs I remember we used to do was, Chicago was one of my favorite groups. They had a song called Dialogue. There was a conversation between two people, but we did it as a father and son combination. So I actually sang on the drums as I played, and we did that. So I remembered those songs. And a lot of the songs, from back, like Going to Chicago and all those songs from back in the day, we played all those songs. I've drummed on all those songs. So
And tell us about the Farfisa organ that we're seeing in this picture.
So the Farfisa organ, when I met Terry Lewis, when Terry was the one, like I say, I was playing drums, and he said, I already got a drummer who was Jelly Bean Johnson of the time. But he said, you should play keyboards because your dad plays keyboards. And I said, okay, cool. So anyway, we didn't have keyboards. So we went out to the club that I think it was called not the Surfside, the Caribbean Club, I think is what it was called. And my dad had all of his, his keyboard, his little Farfisa set up. And we went in there, but the bartender knew us, or he knew me. And I said, yeah, we're just going to take the organ for a day and do this gig, and then we'll bring it back. It's like, okay, cool. Now, to this day, I don't know who drove us, because both Terry and I were too young to actually drive cars at this point. But somebody took us out there. We basically hijacked my dad's organ. We played our little gig at Upward Bound where we met. And we played, Tuesday Heartbreak, and I think we played Tower of Power and New Birth. We played all these different songs, Earth, Wind, and Fire. And then we took the organ back, set it right up in the same place that it was. I don't think he ever knew that we took it. Did he ever know?
Well, he certainly didn't know from now asking him, but he
Okay.
was delighted.
Yeah. But anyway, that's the organ that I played when I met Terry Lewis on my very first gig that I played with Terry. That's the organ that we played.
I love that there's photographic evidence.
Yes, exactly.
One more historical picture I want to share is that, so as we started getting deeper into these conversations and more memories came to the surface, Jimmy would text me these things like, hey, I remember when this song was #1 on the charts, we would do these things. And it was all linked to like little musical snippets and names and places, and the name Tanglefoot came to the surface for you. And you said, I think I was in this band called Tanglefoot, and then eventually became Sky. And I became obsessed with figuring out what the heck you were talking about, because at this point you would have you would have been maybe 14.
Yeah.
And you joined a band with a bunch of kids from Robbinsdale, a bunch of white kids from Robbinsdale.
Yep.
And we're playing
Rock band.
some of these kind of under the radar clubs. So there was absolutely no paper trail of this band ever existing. But I did find the members, and they started sending me pictures. Yeah. So this was in a club on Lake Street in Minneapolis called the Tempo.
Yeah.
And that's Tanglefoot. I believe the gentleman on the far left was the leader of the band, and then the woman was also a singer in the band. And
Yep. Gary, Katie.
yeah, Katie was the one that dug up these photographs, and she actually mailed them to me. They came on Christmas Day. I was like, oh.
Yeah. A good Christmas present, for sure.
And she had a lot of memories. I tracked down 2 of the other guys that were brothers that were in the band that are still around in the cities. And they actually remembered not just playing with Jimmy in this band, but they remembered being around Cornbread and having the opportunity to go see him perform. And at one point he came and sat in with your band. So this was a time when your dad was still, very active in your life. And I thought it was just so fascinating to uncover this little slice of your life that no one really had ever talked about before.
Yeah, and what I remember about this, the Tempo bar, was we played, and I was still in school. I think I was probably in, 8th grade, 9th grade, maybe, something like that. And I remember I would play till 1 in the morning and then go home, and then I'd have to be up for like a 6 a.m. 0-hour class at school. But it was like, that's what I wanted to do, It was like, and I was surprised. I was kind of surprised that my mom, actually was okay with it, But she was, they picked me up from the club and, whatever, and make sure I always had a ride home and that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was my musical life, and I loved that that cap. My mom would never let me wear a hat like this, back in the day, the Superfly days, everybody wanted a a brim. She wouldn't let me have a brim, but she got me that apple cap, and I loved that. And then I even remember that sun medallion that I'm wearing. That's was my favorite outfit. I wore that every night, playing at that club. So
Such a cool looking kid.
Yeah, it was fun.
So shortly after Tanglefoot and then Sky is when you started performing with Mind and Matter.
Right.
And the 2 brothers that were in this band said they had the opportunity to audition for Mind and Matter, but they thought, we're going to keep going down this kind of more rock and roll vein. And now, 50 years later, they're like, maybe we should have tried to stay with Jimmy. He kind of did well after that. But as I was going,
by the way, I just want a quick aside, is that what was interesting was, so Andrea, we already know, she's the forensic queen of stuff, right? But what was so cool about it was, which of the Tracy brothers was it that came to see my dad? Ron Tracy. So he now runs a guitar shop, right? Making guitars and that?
He's actually worked on repairing Prince's guitars.
Yes.
He's been around as a luthier and repair person in the cities for a long time.
So when I came up to surprise my dad for his birthday, I think that was the same day, right?
I
Was
think
that the
so.
day that he showed up?
Yeah.
And so Andrea actually had him show up, and I hadn't seen this dude in 40 some years, and so we got a chance to reunite and have a great conversation, and that was really cool. So I mean, beyond just the reunification, if you will, of myself and my dad, it's just all these other people that were kind of around that have been brought back together because of what Andrea has done. So very cool. Thank you. Very cool.
Well, I have a few more pictures to share, and then if there's any questions from the audience, we'd love to hear from you too. But I did want to mention, so Mind and Matter was your next group.
Yep.
And that would have probably been like 1975, maybe,
Yeah.
that you were starting to work on that.
Uh-huh.
So flash forward 50 years, I'm in Cornbread's basement going through his belongings, and I found a binder of his business cards that he'd kept over the years, which I thought was really cool because you can kind of see the progression of how he branded himself over time. But
Yep.
tucked right in next to one of Cornbread's business cards was actually Jimmy's first business card. And I just thought that was so touching that he kept it right there
Yeah.
next to his own. Like,
Yeah.
it's part of his story too, you know?
Exactly. It's so cool.
Yeah.
So awesome.
I have a couple more pictures. This is actually the moment that Jimmy surprised Cornbread on his 96th birthday
Yeah,
at
yep,
Palmer's.
Yep.
So now you've had a chance to come back a few times and see your dad,
Yeah.
Usually around a gig, which I think
Yes.
is appropriate.
Yes.
Music is the thing that keeps you coming back into each other's lives. They had a chance to share the stage on Cornbread's 95th birthday. Then Jimmy flew in for the 96th birthday and came and watched him play at Palmer's, which is where he was playing in the video that we opened the night with.
Yep.
And it was just so fun to see the look on
It
his
was
face.
it was a total shock. And once again, what God's plan. I had been invited to town for the Timberwolves were playing a playoff game against the I think it was the Nuggets, maybe. I think. And I remember they invited me to town, and they said, "Can you come to town on Sunday, whatever, whatever?" And I said, "Oh yeah, that's my dad's birthday." And it's cool because his gig that he does at Palmer's is a 5 o'clock gig, and because of the way the NBA schedule was set up, the game wasn't until like 8:30. So I was like, "Oh, I can go see my dad and then still go to the game." So that's so anyway, that's what I ended up doing. That was I'm trying to think, was that no, that wasn't the Snoop Dogg game, was it? No, that was this
No,
year.
yeah.
That was this year. Yeah, that was interesting. Anyway, but yeah, that was really cool, and it was great to see him and great to surprise him because I know he had no idea. But once again, just God's plan. It just kind of all worked out
Yeah.
perfectly. Yeah.
Yeah. And then a night I'll never forget was just 6 weeks ago. You came back to play the book release show at the Cedar Cultural Center
Yeah.
in Minneapolis. And Cornbread and Jimmy played. We did a set where it was talking, and then they got a chance to do their real-time duet with no Zoom lag,
Right.
actually playing just the two of you back and forth on keyboard and piano,
Yeah.
which brought the house down. It was really just such a moving moment. And then you also got a chance to sit in with his band and play a whole set.
Yeah. No, that was awesome, and it was funny because when I went up for the 95th birthday, I let the band play a set, and I just watched. I just wanted to kind of watch, and then I went up and played a little bit on the second set with him. But this time, we just jumped right into it and did it. We talked it was funny because I didn't realize it, but there was a review in the paper of the show, and it was like, first of all, we talked for an hour.
Yes.
And then we played for an hour, and then we signed autographs and books and albums for 2 hours after that, and they said, how does he get the energy to do that? But it's just, once again, it's just the oxygen of music, it's just a different thing. It's just a different oxygen, and
Well,
it was a great evening.
And I was thinking about the very first thing you told me, which is that I know I got that skill from my dad of working the room until there's no people left.
Yeah.
That I will stay until I've shook the last hand and I've greeted the last person, I've signed the last autograph.
Yep.
And sure enough, at the Cedar, it was 1 a.m.
Yeah.
when the autograph line finally finished, and Cornbread looked up and went, "Oh, is that all?"
Yeah, that's right. That's right. He was ready to go.
And I took this at 1 a.m. outside the venue,
Yeah.
which was just such a beautiful evening. And Jimmy's holding the new tote bag that we
Yes.
had made with Cornbread's catchphrase on it. I am a blessed dude.
Right. Love that. I love that.
Well, in a little bit, we're going to actually play for you a new album that has been released of Cornbread's music. It's called Cornbread Harris Anthology. We're going to play it in full while we mingle with you and sign books. But I would love to know if anyone has a question for Jimmy while we're all here together.
Or for Andrea.
That too.
The book lady, as Cornbread called her.
Yes.
The book lady.
Yes.
Hey, thanks, guys. It's been really interesting. From reading the book, it's really, clear that your father's like super proud of you and everything you've accomplished. I'm curious, like, what does your dad think about your music? Like, are there any songs that you've written or produced in particular that like he has told you that he really likes?
Wow, that's a great question. Not that I can think of. I don't know. Andrea, is there anything that sticks out in particular to him?
Well, there was a pretty poetic exchange leading up to the 95th birthday party because Cornbread said, I think I should play one of your songs and you should play one of my songs. So he had taught you Deeper Blues and
right.
Blue, Blue, Blue Blues. And he said, what are you going to bring to the table now
Yes.
for us to play? And you sent the music and the sheet music for Human.
Human. Yes, that's right.
And in a funny turn of events, it never got played
Right.
at the show.
Yeah.
But leading up to the show, on one of our Zoom calls, you read the lyrics to him, and then we listened to it, the three of us together, and he
Yeah.
was very, very moved by the sentiment of
Yes.
that song.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Okay, so Human. We'll go with Human. He likes that.
Anybody else?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to mention that some of the people here were in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, back in June, and we went to see your father play at Palmer's.
Oh, awesome. Love that.
We were very excited.
That's awesome. Did
You-
you have fun?
We had a great time.
I'll tell you something funny. So Terry and I, one of the things when we went in the not in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, when we went in the Songwriters Hall of Fame about 5 or 6 years ago, they asked us on the red carpet, "What is it that you want to do that you haven't done yet?" And our answer was, we looked over. Babyface was on the red carpet with us, and we said, "Well, we never made a record with Babyface. We'd like to do that." So we did. Then we said, and we started an album like 35 years ago that we never finished. We'd probably like to do that. And so we did. We finished our album. The third thing we said is we've never got a chance to go play our own songs live. And so in Minneapolis a few months ago, we were able to do a concert, a festival called Taste of Minnesota, and basically play all of our songs. I think we didn't play all of our songs. We played like 37 or 38 songs or something like that, and then finished up with Morris Day and the Time and played songs with them. So it was very much a celebration of music that not only from us, but that was recorded in Minnesota. The interesting thing was, Cornbread couldn't come to that gig because he had his own gig that same night. So he's playing at Palmer's, we're playing at this festival and stuff. So I was like, I can't go see him play. He couldn't come and see me play. But that's how it goes sometimes. But I thought about that the other day, that we didn't get a chance to see, because we're both gigging musicians,
He's not missing that gig for anything.
Yeah.
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 It was a James Harris citywide takeover.
Yeah, it was. It definitely was. Definitely was. It was cool. Yeah.
Yes.
All the stuff in the book about Tanglefoot was really interesting. I'm curious two-part question. Do any recordings of Tanglefoot exist? And number two, did you play the saxophone in Tanglefoot as we saw in that photo, or what was the lineup like?
Okay, so as far as recordings, not that I know of. I mean, back in that day, it was all cassettes, probably. I mean, we never went in a studio and actually recorded anything. Somewhere there might be a cassette somewhere. We'll get on Andrea on it, and she'll dig it up. You know what? And matter of fact, you never know. Katie or somebody might have, or was it Lynn who was the manager?
Lynn thought maybe, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess one of them kept all the archives, and then their house burned down.
Oh, that's
so there
right.
was kind
Gary.
of a
Was
tragic
that
loss
Gary?
of, yeah.
Oh yeah, Gary. You know what Gary did, because Gary had a reel-to-reel recorder, and I think we might have done some stuff like in the basement of their house where we rehearsed. Now that I think about it, yeah. But yeah, if the house burned down, that's probably not there anymore. And I did play sax because what happened was in 4th grade, I wanted to take an instrument just because it would get you out of class, right, if you could take music. So I grabbed a clarinet, and I did clarinet for a couple of years, excuse me, and then somebody told me that, well, you know, sax is the same fingering as a clarinet, and it's cooler with the girls. I said, okay, I'm going to switch to sax. So I did. I switched to sax. And so back in that day, when I played with Tanglefoot, I did play a little bit of sax. I mainly held it, but there was a couple of songs that had like horn parts in it, and I would play. But Tanglefoot was very much a rock band. I mean, we played the Allman Brothers. I remember we played Deep Purple, Smoke on the Water. That was like our big dun, 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 dun. Like that was the kind of stuff we were playing. And I remember I had 2 organs. I had an organ, like a Hammond organ, and then the organ in the earlier picture that you saw my dad playing, I used to take that organ out of the house, and we'd travel with it. And so I'd have like 2 keyboard player, or 2 keyboards, these everywhere. And I really liked Yes, the group Yes. And so I was trying to be Rick Wakeman. I just wanted keyboards like all around me, and I just wanted that kind of thing. So that was my crazy back in those days. Yeah.
I love that. Yes?
I just have a small question. So is Max going to continue the tradition from your father to you?
Max is definitely the one that's, Max is definitely me when I was that age. He's 24 now. But what was interesting about Max was that, you know, Terry and I took a lot of time off. We ended up with kids the same age, Max and Terry's son, Talon, same age, played basketball together. So all summer we were like at AAU camps. And by the way, Ray Parker Jr.'s son also played on that same team. And it was actually Kenny Smith's team. He was the coach, AAU team. And so we would spend summers together in gyms, right? And we didn't do as much work. We kind of took a hiatus to raise our kids and raise our families. And so it was interesting that Max, one day, I remember we used to take him to school and all of that. And Max is also, I should say, he's a type 1 diabetic. So I, a lot of times, would be the ones that would do the shot for him and the tests for him back in the day. And so I remember when he graduated high school, and he finally was at the point where he didn't have to do homework, he didn't have to do all the school stuff and the extracurricular playing basketball and all that stuff. And I remember he would wake up in the morning, and I'd hear music. He'd be working on a song. And then I'd go to bed at night, and he'd be working on a song. And then I'd wake up in the morning, and he'd be working on a song. And I kind of said to him, I said, Max, I said, this is really cool. I said, that's the way I used to be. Like, I didn't have anything else in my life but music, but it was just like literally I'd wake up with a song, I'd go to bed with a song, I'd wake up with a song, and it was like a continuous thing. And he realized, because he was now older, and I didn't have to take him to basketball games, I didn't have to take him to places anymore, he said, isn't it nice now that you can just go back and just be 24 hours of music, because you don't have to take care of us now. And the fact that he even understood that, like how much I don't even call it a sacrifice, because it wasn't a sacrifice, but how much time I took away from actually doing music to make sure that hopefully they had a good upbringing, that was really important to me to do. And but he was the one that recognized that. He was like, Dad, you can go back to doing your thing now. And it's like, okay, cool.
Aww.
And so now I do. I'm up all night making music like I used to do, which I love, you know. But I got a chance to raise him. And one other thing I'll say about that was that my mom, very much when my dad left, a lot of it I know had to do with my mom kind of telling him, like, you said you're going to settle down and not do music and raise your son and that. And even back in that day, I couldn't imagine giving up music. I just felt like, how can you give up, music? That was crazy to me. But I remember I dropped out of high school to pursue music, and I thought my mom was going to hit the ceiling. And she just kind of said, as long as I see you really going after it. And I always thought that was really weird. And about 5 years later, 6 years later, she never got to see me walk across a graduation stage, but she was my date when we won our first Grammy. Mm. So she got to watch me walk across the Grammy stage, and that was like my graduation. But later on, maybe 2 years ago, when we got together, Andrea, somebody said to me, do you think the reason your mom let you pursue what you wanted to do is because she didn't let your dad do it? And that was the other reason that I felt like I really needed to let him know. He literally sacrificed what could have been his career to raise me. And I just thought it was so important for me to say that and acknowledge that. So that's kind of the full circle thing for me.
It's beautiful. I love that, despite the fact that music was a reason that you had to separate, it's also really what's brought you back together.
Exactly. Totally.
Thank you so much for sharing this story.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a beautiful story. Yeah.
First of all, let's give it up for Andrea.
Oh.
Yeah. Yes.
The parallels and the relationship, the coming back together, there's so much inspiration in the story. Because if his dad didn't teach him music in the beginning, the world wouldn't have the legends that we have, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis today,
That's right.
and the body of work that they have, right? So the whole parallels of being able to see that play out, and see the seeds being planted, and to see that it nurtured this incredible beast of music that has helped the world. The story is amazing, and I'm happy that the reconciliation happened, and I'm happy that you didn't have to sing, you guys didn't have to talk about it. It was just a musical thing, a communication thing, and it just kind of came to be. My dad died when I was a young fella, and I never had a chance to tell him some of the things that I wanted to reconcile with him. And the only time I got a chance to do that was on his deathbed. And he looked at me and said, "Son, I'm proud of you." And the saddest thing is he said, "Find out how much it would cost for my funeral." And that was the last time I seen him. And I realized at that point, after burying him, that we reconciled in his way. "Son, I love you.
Yep.
I'm proud of you." And that's all I ever needed to hear. And so as someone who's gone through something like a dynamic like that with my dad, which is such a touching story, to be able to see this and to know that your dad is older and that you're able to merge those two stories together and give them that reconciliation and bring that story to the world, bravo to you.
Thank you. By the way, that reminds me about regretting not saying things to people. It's the reason, one of the reasons, or the thing that hit me about not telling people how I felt about things was when Prince passed away. Because there were so many unsaid things between us, because I thought he was going to be alive forever, and we were going to get together and work. We had talked about, working, he said, "If you produce an album on me, what would it be?" And we said, "Well, we'll go back to the vault and grab those right around 83, 82, 83. We'll grab all those songs and we'll start with that." And he was really enthused about it and was really excited about it, and had actually talked to Terry, early that week, the week that he passed. And I just kind of felt like I'm not going to leave things unsaid to people. And that was, I think that was the seeds that got planted towards with my dad also, besides the fact that my kids were, grown. But I think that was the thing. I don't want to leave things unsaid to people. So I'm very much, and particularly in the kind of social media world where we live now, where it's a lot of, criticism and a lot of, hate and all that stuff. If I see something I like, I just reach out and let people know I like. The gentleman that just stood up and asked the question or made the comment, he has two beautiful daughters that are DJs. And I came across them and I immediately just DM'd him and just said, "Your daughters are great." And now we've become friends, and his daughters are going to college now and studying music, and they're so beautiful and musical in that. But I just think it's important to do that. It's like if somebody crosses your mind, text them or call them or just say, "Hey, you're just on my mind," or DM them. And I just think, to me, that's what I've tried to do nowadays, is when somebody comes across my mind or I see something that reminds me of them, I just let them know that, because I don't want to leave things left unsaid. And I just think it's an important, as an older guy, not so totally old, but older. I just think it's one of the lessons that I've learned in life. And Prince was the one that kind of started that, and obviously then with my dad. But I try to carry through with that every day.
Wow. I feel so lucky to just have a front row seat to all of this unfolding around me. I mean, I'm lucky I had a recorder.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
And I can also hear Cornbread in my head saying, "Kid, you're not lucky, you're blessed."
That's right.
That is
That's
his
right.
message to the world.
That's right.
And I'm so
Blessings.
glad that we could share some of Cornbread's story and some of the Cornbread and Jam story.
Yeah.
It's just been a journey of a lifetime for me to become completely intertwined in your lives in a very unexpected way. And thank you for trusting me to help share this story with the world.
Well, thank you for illuminating the story so beautifully. And the cool thing about it is that now that the book is done, it doesn't feel like an ending, it just feels like a beginning. And that's
Yeah.
what's so cool. I feel like I have a great friend, a great confidant, a great forensic person to go find stuff whenever I go, hey, whatever happened to that? Never remember. And I hit her all the time about stuff now that I find. So
I've definitely
it's so
been
cool.
assigned cases. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. But I appreciate it, and I appreciate you being able to share it and share this story with the world. I just think the story of reconciliation and forgiveness and all of that is so important for people to see, and everybody will use it in their own way. You know, whether they have a family member, whether they reach out to someone else and go, hey, you should check this out or whatever. But I just think that there's so much, kind of separation and hurt in the world, just where we're at right now, that I just think that this is such a positive story, and it revolves around music, which I call the divine art. And I think this is proof that it truly is.
Well said.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. Well, we want to leave you with music, and we also want to hang out with you and talk to you. So we're going to have a little listening party right now for this new album, Cornbread Harris Anthology. Cornbread is an extremely inspiring person. I've been inspired to do a lot of things I was not expecting, and one of them was to start a record label so that I could release this record.
Yep.
And I want to give a special shout out to my friend Joe Holt, who's in the audience. He and I are taking on this endeavor together.
Yeah.
And he's been a huge impetus and support as we figure out what this means. We've gone to the record plant in Minneapolis, figured out how you do that, what it
Yep.
means. And I just had Cornbread sign a record for Joe, and he wrote on it, "It's your fault this happened."
Right.
So thank you, Joe. He also edited the video that we watched at the beginning. So
Yeah, that
he's
was
been
awesome.
a huge Cornbread champion and supporter as well, and I'm just so grateful for that. So this record is really cool for a couple reasons. One, there's a lot of music that's long out of print that you can't find anywhere that spans Cornbread's career. It doesn't span his entire career. It starts in 1955, and it ends in 2021, which is 67 years of music. But his career is actually even longer than that, because he started performing in the mid-40s and is still performing every week at Palmer's now.
Yep.
So I think that's just amazing that
It is.
it could include that much of a person's life and impact. It starts with the song that he sang with the Augie Garcia Quintet, a cover of "Going to Chicago," and it includes one of the recordings he made with the Peterson brothers, Paul Peterson and his brothers, which kind of spawned this whole story that is still unfolding to this day. And can I share that it has also been submitted for consideration for a historical Grammy?
Yes.
So Cornbread's story continues
Yes, it
on,
does.
and man, is he a blessed dude.
Yes, he is. And we're all blessed dudes.
Now we're all blessed dudes.
That's right.
So thank you for being here with us, and we'll listen to the record.
Yeah. Sure. Awesome.